Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Now we have three more chapters left. These remaining chapters are mostly about laws and regulations. There's not much to teach here. We don't have too many graphs or formulas to deal with. So I'd recommend you read the slides on yourself. Now I'm going to cover chapter 15 and chapter 17, just to make sure we cover everything that is like teachable, like slides, like formulas, curves, and graphs. But chapter 16 is basically just about the laws and regulations of the Federal Reserve. So you read it on your own. And after we finish this, we'll have a review session so that you can come up with your questions and every problem that you had dealing with this. And I can also go over all the material one more time super quick so we're prepared for our exam next week. Okay, this chapter is about unemployment. Chapter 15, unemployment. What is unemployment? First of all, let's define the word employed. People who are employed are those who work. Paid employees in their own businesses or unpaid employees in a family business. If I'm working somewhere and I'm adding value to that business, I'm considered employed. They could pay me, or I could be just working for my, let's say, parents' business. Let's say my parents, they own a restaurant, and during the summer, I help around. I work the restaurant, help them, but I don't get paid, but I add value to their business, and of course, I enjoy the benefits through the money they spend on me. So we also have full-time and part-time workers. Again, you could be a full-time worker, work 8 hours every day, or you could be part-time. You only work like 4 hours, or you could only be working during the summers, things like that. Also, we have temporarily absent workers, people who are on vacation, I'm on unpaid vacation, or I have an illness, or there could be a bad weather, or the situation right now with the coronavirus. That's also considered employed. If you're not laid off at your job, you're still considered employed even though you're not going to work. Unemployed, those who were not employed. And this is the main thing. Only those who are available for work and who tried to work during the previous try to find work during the previous months, previous 4 weeks, are considered unemployed. If I stay home, I say, okay, I don't want to work. I'm not unemployed. I'm just out of the labor market. I'm only considered unemployed if I'm looking for work, if I want to work, and I have been looking for work in the past 1 month, 4 weeks, and I couldn't find any work. Those waiting to be recalled to a job, those who are laid off and they're still waiting to be recalled to their job. Those who are not in the labor force, they are not employed and not unemployed. When you're talking about the labor force, people who want to work. Now, these people who want to work, they're either employed, which is already working, or unemployed, which means they cannot find work right now. For example, full-time students, homemakers, or retirees. These folks are out of the labor force. They're not interested to work. They're just not in the total labor force supply. If you look at the breakdown of the population in January 2016, we can see that almost, let's say 60% of the entire adult population, they are employed. Around 30, let's say 35%, they are not in the labor force, and around 5% are unemployed. Now, this 5%, it may look very tiny and not important, but that's actually a huge problem because these folks, these 5%, these people who need to work, they need to make some money to be able to pay their bills and pay their rent. and they cannot find work. So one of the main jobs of an economist would be to try to study this problem. This tiny, if you look at this here, this is a tiny 5%, but this 5% is a huge problem. So one of our main jobs is to try to study what causes these 5% to go to 6% or to go down to 4%, and what to do with it. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the institution in the United States responsible for tracking employment and other household economic situation stuff. Like if you remember from previous chapters, chapter 11 and chapter 10, we were talking about the consumer basket. That was also job of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Divides the adult population into 3 categories: employed, unemployed, and not in the labor force. Now, labor force, total number of workers, employed and unemployed. We're talking about the total number of people who can work and who want work. Some of them are employed, some of them are unemployed. And when we talk about the unemployment rate, remember any rate, when we talk about rate, whether it's inflation rate, unemployment rate, anytime you hear the word rate, it always means this. You have a group of people, things, anything. You have a big group, and you want to find the rate of something in this group. It will always be the number of individuals with that trait or with that situation on top over the total number of individuals in that group as a percentage multiplied by 100 to give you a percentage point. To be more clear, let me use my tablet here. Okay, take for example, let's say the rate of unemployment. Want to find the unemployment rate. When we're talking about unemployment, it means unemployment among those in the labor force. So unemployment, the number of people who are unemployed, the number unemployed over total labor force. That's the participation data. At unemployment, the number of unemployed people over the total labor force multiplied by 100. Another index is the labor participation rate. The labor participation rate, it tells us how many of our adult population, what percentage point of our adult population takes part in the economy. So unemployment rate, number of unemployed over labor force, but labor force participation rate, the portion of our entire population, adult population, who are economically active or who want to be economically active and who want to work. So one more time. Now this time, labor force participation. That's our adult population adult population over the number of labor force, which is unemployed plus employed multiplied by 100. Again, remember, when we talk about rate, any rate means the number of people in the group with that certain quality that we want to study over the entire number of people in that group. Multiplied by 100. Percentage of the total adult population that is in the labor force. Excuse me. Now, fraction of the population that has chosen to participate in the labor market. That's a labor force participation rate. So two different types of rates. Unemployment rate, number of unemployed, compared to the entire labor force, and labor force participation rate. That's the labor force compared to the total adult population. Labor force participation rate actually tells us about how economic active a population is. So one of the main problems of many developing countries is that they have a very low labor force participation rate. Like so many people, they just don't work for many different kinds of reasons. And one of the basic tools to combat poverty is to increase this labor force participation rate. For example, empowering women to enter the workforce and to participate in the economy. That's one of the main tools to combat poverty. If you encourage women to, especially like in developing countries and in poorer countries, to be more economically active, to go to work and to start making money, then they can spend that money on raising their children better, on their education, everything. It could combat poverty. One of the main tools, increasing labor force participation rate. Labor market experience of various demographic groups. Adults of prime age working, as you can see here, unemployment rate for white males, 4.4, and their labor force participation is almost 90%. White female, as you can see, is lower. Their participation rate is lower, almost 15% lower than men. This 15% could be housewives, women who don't want to work. They better they prefer to stay home and create value through doing housework and raising children. But also you can see that unemployment rate is higher. That means those women who want work, they have a higher unemployment rate than the white men. For black men, unemployment rate 10%, while labor participation is again lower by almost 10% than white men. And for black women, again, unemployment rate is higher, 9.1%, while labor force participation rate is almost equal to white women, a little higher. And for teenagers, that's another issue because teenagers, it's a whole different world for them. When we talk about teenagers, first of all, their labor force participation rate is much lower because many teenagers, they decide to go to school, they stay in school longer, they go to university, things like that. And also their unemployment rate is much higher because a teenager on the labor market is at a disadvantage when compared to older workers. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're a small business owner. You have two people applying for a job. One of them is a 20-year-old or an not a 20-year-old, 18-year-old or a 19-year-old. The other one is a 35-year-old person with work experience. Who are you more likely to hire? I would personally hire the 35-year-old because I would expect a 19-year-old to, well, be inexperienced, be a little immature, things like that. Same thing applies to the small business owner. Many small business owners, they prefer to work with 35-year-olds, 40-year-old people with work experience because there are things that you can only learn when working. No school can teach you things that about human interactions, about bureaucracy, things that schools don't teach you. So you need to actually work and learn them. And if I'm a small business owner, I would prefer that person that is coming to work with me, work for me, already know them, compared to the situation that the person who wants to work would actually learn these things by making mistakes while being employed by me. So that's the problem with high unemployment rate among teenagers. Now, labor market experiences. Women of prime working age, 25 years old to 55 years old, they have lower rates of labor force participation than men. Again, the reason being because women have certain other options, such as being in a stay-at-home mom, or a housewife to just tend to the housework, and they're actually adding a lot of value to the economy. Next time, for example, you cook yourself something, always remember that the time you put into cooking that meal for yourself, you could have um, you could have like a hamburger or a pizza ordered from the outside, or after the quarantine was over, you can eat out. That is value. So when you spend time doing something, cooking yourself a meal, there is an opportunity cost. If you remember, price comes from the opportunity cost. So the price of the meal I cooked for myself at home is the opportunity cost of the next best thing. The next best thing would be for me to order food from let's say McDonald's or Pizza Hut. If I order food from outside, I have to pay them a lot more money than I would have to spend on just buying the material and cook for myself. The value of those women who are of the work that those women who are not in the labor force add to the economy is derived from here. I read an article in the New York Times. I think they were talking about trillions of dollars, the value that women add to the economy by just doing the housework. And also men, as we will see later, that men are also they have started to be a part of this. Once in the labor force, men and women, they have similar rates of unemployment. Labor market experiences, again, blacks of prime working age, similar rates of labor force participation as prime age white people, much higher rates of unemployment. Teenagers, lower rates of labor force participation, much higher rates of unemployment than older workers. Now, I don't know about like the race differences in in the United States, so I don't have anything to say in this part. I'm sure you know more about these things. That what could possibly cause a higher unemployment among different ethnic groups compared to the others, or lower labor force participation rates again among different ethnic groups. I'm pretty sure you know more about this than me. But teenagers, again, lack of experience, and well, generally it's riskier to employ teenagers at work. Now, unemployment since 1930 and 1960s. Unemployment rate, 1960s. If you can see here, in 1960s, we have around 6.5%. Then it's like it falls when we're talking about 1970s, it falls below 4%. Then we have the crisis of 1975 to 79, which kind of make the unemployment rate goes up because of, I think it was the oil prices. And there was something going on in 1975. Then we have again another crisis in 80, 83, 82. Now we have Ronald Reagan's administration, unemployment rate first going up and then coming down. Then the 90s, I believe this is the dot-com bubble. There was an economic crisis in the early 90s, which caused the unemployment rate goes up all the way. What I want to talk about is here. This here, it's almost at 9%. This is the Great Recession, 2008, which you already saw many documents and documentaries and information available to you for your second writing. This caused the unemployment rate to just shoot up. It was almost 4.5% the year before, but suddenly in 1 year, the whole thing crashed. And now I think if you have data for today, unemployment again is super high up. Many people lost their jobs because of this shutdown and the whole coronavirus problem. But the good news, if you recently hurt economically by the coronavirus, is that whenever there is a spike in unemployment, here or here, unemployment rate is fixed super quick. It may go up suddenly, but then it comes down super fast. So don't worry, situation will get back to normal in no time. But what do we mean by normal? Here's when we talk about the natural rate of unemployment. What we mean by normal is the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment tells us on average, as a normal situation, in a normal situation, this country has this kind of unemployment rate. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with shocks or different crises or booms or busts. This is just about the situation in the country, the culture, the institutions, the economic foundation, the government, everything that is super hard to change. A crisis, such as the 2008 Great Recession or the current coronavirus disaster, these come and go. But what remains is this 5% natural unemployment rate. Because this means that the efficiency of this country's economy is just this big. Natural rate of unemployment, normal rate of unemployment, around which the unemployment rate fluctuates. 4.9 or almost 5% in 2015. Cyclical unemployment, as we saw, is these changes around the natural rate of unemployment. The deviation of unemployment from its natural rate. Women's role in American society. Talk about women's labor force participation. It changed dramatically over the past century. Most importantly, thanks to new technologies, it reduced the amount of time required to complete routine household tasks. For example, the laundry machine. The laundry machine actually transformed the whole household tasks because, like 100 years ago, doing the laundry was a super time consuming, super demanding task. And in that time, you had to actually spend like a whole day just doing your laundry. But today, now in my house, I do the laundry and I just throw everything into the machine, just throw two Tide Pods, turn it on, and then pick them all up, and then throw everything in the dryer, turn it on, it's done. So no more work. Improved birth control also reduce the number of children born to the typical family. More importantly, if I want to add it, something that it gave women the control over when they want to have a child, whether they're prepared. Am I like, am I in college? Am I still studying? Do I need to spend time on, let's say, on my thesis to graduate? Or no, am I like enjoying a very stable life with a husband, with a job, everything is okay, so I will decide to have a baby. The control, the choice is now mine. So thanks to improved birth control, I have a say. I can actually plan when do I want to have a baby. And also it reduced the number of children born to the typical family. So on average, fewer children, fewer work. But on the other hand, remember this, when we're talking about reducing the number of children, it's a trade-off. That's why I don't really like this statement, because when we say to reduce the number of children born to a typical family, there's also a trade-off. We have fewer kids, but now the quality of those kids are much higher than the quantity. Quantity went down, but the quality went up in terms of resources we need to invest in them. For example, 100 years ago, my grandparents would have like, let's say they had like 9 kids, like almost not 100 years ago, like 70 years ago, something like that, when they got married. They had like 9 kids each, and these kids were pretty much on their own, like just go out there and grow up. But now, when I look at my younger cousins, there's just like one of my cousins, and she's 10. She has to go to the piano lessons. She has to go to learn English, learn French, learn like, I have absolutely no idea how many languages that she speaks. Like by the time she's 15, like probably 6 languages. So now families have fewer children, but still we need to spend more time because it's a much more competitive world today. So those fewer children, we need to invest more time on them. We need to spend more resources on them to be able to prepare them to compete in the new world. So this statement, reduce the number of children, I don't really like this statement. I think it's fairly inaccurate. You could actually make it more accurate. Changing political and social attitudes, that's also a very important thing. Before World War II, the general consensus was that women are too feminine to be able to do serious work. Of course, this consensus came from uh, certain politicians and other like society leaders who wanted to keep the status quo, and there were like lots of fighting, which I'm not familiar with, like between different kind of ideas. But then the Second World War happened. Second World War happened. All the men were needed in the armed forces. Now, when you send all the men into the army and the navy and the air force, who is going to equip them? They need ships, they need tanks, they need airplanes, they need guns to be able to defend the country. Then Who is left? The women. So after World War II started, countries, they decided, okay, those ideas that we lived with for thousands of years, they're not going to keep us safe from the Nazis. So let's just say we reconsider. What happened next was this poster, Rosie the Riveter. This poster, this is not the work of an activist or a philosopher or an artist. This is the product of economics. Men went to war, companies needed women to work for them to be able to produce. So they come up with this kind of advertisement to encourage women to enter the workforce, to enter the labor market. That's the beauty of economics. Women's role in American society changed dramatically over the past century. New technologies improved birth control, changing political and social attitudes. Now, let's look at this graph here. Again, you see in 1950s, women's labor force participation rate was much lower than men, around 27%, while men were at 80 something percent. 80, let's say 85% of all the men were in the labor force. Now, again, remember about the labor force. This could be employed or unemployed. We have two types of labor force. But then, as time went on and on, more women started to enter the labor force. More women started to think that I need to go to work, and fewer men were in the labor force because more men suddenly thought that, okay, there is not as much pressure on me to be the main breadwinner of the family and to go to work. So now I can actually go to college. Now I can study more to be able to be more productive instead of just jumping into the labor force out of high school. I can now go to college. I can get an engineering degree. I can get a medical degree, something like that. I can spend more time being in the college, or I can retire earlier. On the other hand, I worked enough. Both me and my wife were economically active, so now I can retire, enjoy my pension, and she can retire. And when we add our pensions together, we can still have a very decent life. So pressure on men went down, so their labor force participation rate went down, and also women started to take part more, take a bigger part in the labor force. Now, let's have a quick break here. Come back.